Hi there BookTube, it's Eleanor here and this is my Jane Eyre / Jane Eyre adaptation-a-thon, readathon wrap-up. So if you didn't know, myself and the lovely Janet from Swirly Girly Reads, if you don't check out her video and you don't watch her videos, then you're missing so much. She's brilliant. I love her. She reads exactly the same type of books as me. We tend to have very similar opinions on a lot of books. So if you like my channel, I really think you'll like her. So go check her out. I'll link her down below. But we decided that we were going to read Jane Eyre together. She read it a long time ago. I've never read it, so I wanted to read it. And we were going to read Jane Eyre and then read all the Jane Eyre retellings and adaptations that we had on our shelves, which were quite a few. So at the beginning of this video, I'm going to talk about Jane Eyre. I'm going to talk about the book and the movie because I watched the film after I'd read the book. And then I'm going to move on to the adaptations and tell you what I thought of those. So first of all, my impressions of Jane Eyre. Well, I was really excited to be reading it in my Knickerbocker Classics edition, which is the first time I will have read one of them, and I loved the reading experience. It held open really well. It was really easy to read. I really enjoyed the font in this, and I really loved the fact that you could just put the elastic band over the front to keep it nicely closed. So I was really, really pleased with the reading experience in this classic edition. This book was much better than I expected. It massively exceeded my expectations. It was just so much more than I thought. I really loved Jane's story. I loved learning about her character. I loved seeing her development and her progress and the different places that she went to. I went into this story knowing very little. I knew that there was a Thornfield Hall. I knew she was a governess. I knew there was a romance with the man of the house, but that is all I knew. And there was so much more to this story than that. Jane Eyre is an orphan and she is taken in by her uncle's family, and her uncle on his deathbed tells his wife that he wants Jane Eyre cared for, but the aunt doesn't really want to. She doesn't really like Jane, so Jane is not really a very valued member of the household and she is not treated very kindly. She's eventually sent off to an orphan school, and from there she goes on to be the governess at Thornfield Hall to a little French girl. It's here where she meets Mr. Rochester and we follow the story from there. I don't want to say too much because I really enjoyed going into this with just the basic knowledge. I think it's a really good story. There's some unravelling twists. There's some really interesting elements. If you want to know more about the themes in here, then I definitely suggest, I've mentioned it before, but check out Jen Campbell's talk on Jane Eyre because it was really interesting and really insightful. So I will link that down below as well. So it will come as no surprise that I gave Jane Eyre 5 stars. I absolutely adored it. This is a very interesting book to film adaptation because they changed the chronology in the film, and in this instance I didn't think it worked as well as the book. I much preferred the way the book told the story in sort of order, whereas in this one we start nearer the end and we go through flashbacks, and I know that that's possibly the only way the film could work properly, but it didn't work for me as much. I really preferred the way that the book was told, which is unusual for me because normally I enjoy film adaptations more than the book. But in this instance, I much preferred the book. I think personally that perhaps the book would have done better as a TV adaptation rather than a film. It seems to be in sort of 3 distinct parts. You've got Jane the younger years, Jane at Thornfield, and then Jane not at Thornfield, which I won't spoil where she is. And I think a 3-part TV adaptation probably would have worked much better than a film. I did, however, like the characters that they'd picked as Jane and Mr. Rochester. I thought they were really great characters, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Fairfax, I really liked the character. I really liked the actress chosen for that as well. I found the relationship between Jane and the girl that she's looking after, Adele, much sweeter in the film. It was much more of a motherly type relationship, whereas in the book I felt that the relationship was definitely much more I'm a governess, I'm your governess, and there wasn't as much of an emotional connection between the two in the book. there was in some instances, but it didn't feel quite as romanticized as it felt in the film. In the film, you know, she's instantly cuddling her and quite close to her and very motherly, and so I don't think it made much of a difference. It was just different from the book. So I think if I was going to rate the film, I'd rate it a 4 stars. So the book was definitely better for me in this instance. However, it was really good to re-go over the story and to watch it from someone else's viewpoint, because obviously whoever has written the screenplay and the film and directed the film have had their vision, and so I really enjoyed going back to this world and seeing it through the eyes of them. So the next book that myself and Janet picked up is a new one, which is Jane Eyre by Lindsay Fay. This is a new released book, and it says, "Reader, I murdered him," and I didn't know an awful lot about this going in. Janet very rightly said that this is a bit of a cross between Jane Eyre and Indiana Jones, and I totally agree with her. It had enough plot points in there and references to Jane Eyre for us to know that it had some Jane Eyreisms in there, but it was definitely a book within its own right. So Jane still lives on the edge of her uncle's estate with her mother. Her mother dies one day, and due to circumstances that happen, she is sent off to a school. And following this, there is murder and intrigue, friendship, love, fighting, war. We follow the Anglo-Sikh War with the British East India Company and the Sikh Empire, and it's brilliant. It's one of those books that has a nod to Jane Eyre, but it definitely becomes a book in its own right. I really, really enjoyed it. It was much more fun and fast paced than I was expecting, and I really, really loved this one. I definitely recommend it, and I give this one 5 stars. Next, after those 2 novels, we thought we'd pick up short story collection Reader, I Married Him by Tracy Chevalier. I read the first 4 short stories in this collection, and I really didn't like them, and so I DNF'd it. Next, we picked up The Eyre Affair by Jasper Fforde, and I fully blame this one for the fact it's taken us so long to finish our Jane Eyre readathon. We both hated this book. It took me 10 days to read about 150 pages and make the decision that I just wasn't willing to push through and read something that I wasn't enjoying, and so I DNF'd this one too. Next, I picked up Wild Sargasso Sea by Jane Eyre. This is quite a short book. It's only a couple of 100 pages long, and it gives us Bertha's story. If you haven't read Jane Eyre, if I tell you too much about who Bertha is, it's going to spoil it for you, so I'm just going to say it's Bertha's story. I thought it gave us a really good insight to how Bertha might have become the way she was. I thought it was evocative. It felt stifling at times, and we're in this sort of hot, stifling climate, and the writing made us feel that, which I thought was brilliant. And it really worked to give me a good overview of what Bertha's story might have been. I thought it was a really good book, a solid book, not an excellent book, but a good book, and I gave it 3 stars. Next, we picked up Thornfield Hall by Jane Stubbs. This is a really interesting book. It is Jane Eyre, but written from below stairs. It reminds me very much of Pride and Prejudice with Longbourn, which is a book that was written about from the servants' perspectives. This is from Alice Fairfax's perspective, the housekeeper at Thornfield Hall, and we really get a different idea of some of the goings on at Thornfield, which I really liked. Seeing it reimagined from the servants' perspectives really gave us another view of Bertha and her story as well, and how things might not have been as they are perceived from Jane Eyre's perspective, or either from Mr. Rochester's perspective. It's a really good book. There's a really, really good twist at the end, which I really enjoyed. But be warned, this may make you think about Mr. Rochester slightly differently. And if you love him and don't want him tainted at all, then don't read this book. He's not portrayed in a terrible light, but there are certain aspects of his character which come into question in here from the servants' perspectives that we don't see in Jane Eyre, the original story. I really, really enjoyed this, and I gave it 4 stars. Next, I picked up Re-Jane by Patricia Park. This is meant to be a kind of Jane Eyre retelling, but I don't think it is a Jane Eyre retelling. I think it's a contemporary coming of age story in its own right. There were small similarities and nods to Jane Eyre, but I feel like it had its own story to tell. It was much more about cultural identity, fitting in and learning about yourself. Jane lives with her uncle and his family, and she's half Korean. Her mother has died and she had conceived Jane with an American man. So being half Korean, Jane is looked at very differently from the Korean community in which she lives and even from her family. She ends up taking a nannying job for a couple who live in another part of New York, and she goes to live with them. They're two English professors, well, an English professor and an English school teacher, and she is hired to nanny their young daughter who is Chinese and has been adopted. My only disappointment with this is that the Rochester character, Ed Rochester, who is one of the professors that Jane has gone to work for as a nanny, no surprise there if you know the story of Jane Eyre, was a very weak character compared to the one in the original Jane Eyre book, and I really didn't like his character at all in this. I found him weak and manipulative, and yeah, I didn't like him as a character, and I really didn't want Jane to be anywhere near him. I loved learning more about Korea and the Korean community. We spend part of our time in Korea as well with Jane's extended family, which I really enjoyed, although that part was slightly slower in the book, and that is why it was a longer read for me. This, it wasn't a slow read in terms of it being boring, but it was definitely a slower read because there was lots to take in, and the parts in Korea, there was a lot of cultural things to learn and a lot of interesting information we were taking on. I also really enjoyed the nods in this to certain Bronte references, which were really fun to pick up on. So a really, really solid book, a really enjoyable contemporary story, and I really enjoyed this one and gave it 4 stars. So a really brilliant readathon for me. 2 5 stars, 2 4 stars, a 3 star and 2 DNFs. So yeah, I really enjoyed doing this, and now me and Janet are on the lookout for a new type of thing to do. I really loved reading the original story and then reading lots of books around it. It really made the experience much more full and well-rounded, and also made me question and think about the different characters and seeing it from other perspectives, because often in a story we only see it from one person's perspective, often the protagonist, and in Jane Eyre we see it from Jane Eyre's perspective, so we see what she sees, whereas in these other books it gave me a chance to see it from Bertha's perspective, from Alice Fairfax's perspective, and I really, really loved that. I loved having a whole story and seeing that possibly sometimes we see things how we're pushed to see them, but perhaps this is how it was, and I just really loved that, and having a look behind the curtain. So it was a really great readathon for me, and definitely something that I'm going to do in the future. If you've got any ideas of great classics or great books which have modern retellings, let me know, because I'm really on the lookout to do some more of this, and I haven't got any ideas as of yet. I'm sure they will come, but I would really appreciate any comments down below if you've got any ideas for me. Okay, anyway, that's it for this week. Bye for now, BookTube.